What went wrong with Monk? Depending on who you ask, Dawntrail destroyed the job with its orbification. Others might say it was already ruined when Shadowringers made Greased Lightning passive, and yet others might say nothing holds a candle to the craziness that was the Tornado Kick style of Heavensward. On the other hand, other players have also appreciated every single one of these simplifications. So what's exactly wrong or right with Monk now? There are a few topics to cover in this, so let's talk about it. What happened? Naturally, as Final Fantasy XIV has evolved, jobs have gotten more buttons, but also have become more streamlined, with irrelevant or unhelpful actions being removed, and core actions being focused on more prominently. Usually, new expansions both add new things building on the complexity of a job, while also introducing a bit more quality of life and ease of use additions, and whether the job is more or less complex as a result depends on which of these additions outweigh the other. Sometimes, reworks to a job leaps further along this timeline, and let's not kid ourselves here, job reworks generally don't result in a more complicated job than before. And Monk is probably pretty high in the rankings of jobs with most reworks and overhauls in Final Fantasy XIV, ranging from removing actions that had massive impact on their rotation to simplifying core mechanics, as well as removing more niche features from the job in the aim of streamlining it. Let's take a quick run through history to review the gradual evolution of Monk from where it was to where it is. In A Realm Reborn, Monk had positionals on every step of their 1-2-3. Notably, Bootshine would only crit in the correct form if used from behind the target. Greased Lightning built up one stack at a time each time you used Snap Punch, Demolish or Rock Breaker, building up to 3 stacks. Each stack both reduced GZD like the passives do today, but also increased damage output, which reached its extreme in Shadowringers of 40%, making Black Mage's Enochian blush. Monk used their 1-2-3 combos to build and maintain Greased Lightning, but also had a few options to sprinkle in between. Featherfoot increased their dodge chance, bosses can't miss, to work with their Haymaker GZD that could only be used after dodging. Touch of Death was an extra GZD dot that had nothing to do with the Monk forms, and Monks also yoinked Fracture from Marauder through cross-class actions, which, hilariously, was a dot that wasn't really worth using for Warrior, but because Monk had such a huge damage multiplier, it was actually kinda alright for them. They also had Internal Release, not to be confused with Inner Release, increasing crit chance that other jobs cross-classed for. Steel Peak and Howling Fist served as OGZD attacks to simply use when available, and Perfect Balance was a 3-minute cooldown you could use to jumpstart your rotation. Losing uptime on an enemy effectively meant you would start from 0 Greased Lightning again. They also had Fist form, quote-unquote, buffs they could choose. Fist of Fire increasing damage output, Wind increasing move speed like a ninja, and Earth reducing damage taken. Finally, their Gap Closer Shoulder Tackle did upfront damage. Heavensward then introduced Form Shift, allowing the Monk to start in a form of their choosing, but still had no way of maintaining Greased Lightning without a target. Forbidden Chakra was also added, but there was no way to build chakra stacks without using meditation. Elixir Field and Tornado Kick were added as additional OGZDs, however, using Tornado Kick consumed all of the Greased Lightning stacks, giving rise to an optimal rotation based around it. Stormblood was the first big overhaul to a lot of things. Accuracy was no longer a thing for starters, but more importantly for Monk, Featherfoot, Haymaker, Touch of Death, cross-class actions, and so Fracture all got removed. Perfect Balance's cooldown was changed to 1 minute, making the risk involved with tornado kicking or even dropping Greased Lightning much smaller. As a result of these changes, the job now only used GZDs for things associated with forms. Deep Meditation offered a way to generate chakra by attacking. Depending on which form you were in, Shoulder Tackle would have a slightly different effect, and Riddle of Fire was added as a damage buff, however, it also slowed down your GZD. Shadowringers then replaced a niche GZD called One Ilm Punch with 4-point Fury, which enabled Monk to finally just spam AoE, and it also maintained the damage buff from Twin Snakes. Dragon Kick no longer maintains a blunt damage increasing debuff, but instead grants a Leaden Fist, basically what it does today, but with a timer on it, meaning you now alternated your step 1s instead of using Dragon Kick for the debuff and Bootshine for the damage. Anatman was added as a way to maintain and pause your Greased Lightning. Form Shift was also made able to maintain Greased Lightning. Elemental Tackles were removed, and a 4th stack of Greased Lightning could be attained while in Fists of Wind. Riddle of Fire's GCD slowdown was also removed. The OGCD Steel Peak and Howling Fist were also removed. Finally, Enlightenment is added as an AoE alternative to Forbidden Chakra. Late in the expansion, Greased Lightning was reworked to be entirely passive, removing the damage increasing effect they had as well, but boosting potencies to compensate. And with Tornado Kick being reworked to be just another OGCD on a cooldown. And Anatman changed to focus on Twin Snake's buff instead, although it was rather pointless. More generally, TP was also removed from the game. With Endwalker, Elemental Fists were also removed, Shoulder Tackle was replaced with Thunderclap, and Masterful Blitz was introduced. 4-Point Fury now applies the damage buff instead of extending it. Only Demolish and Snap Punch have positionals now, and all of the OGCD attacks the job had or used to have is either reworked or re-implemented to be a low-level version of Chakra Spenders, as is the case with Steel Peak and Howling Fist, or they are retooled as Masterful Blitz-related actions, as is the case for Elixir Field and Tornado Kick. The finer details of the Masterful Blitz gives rise to 2 rotations for the job, one being a more looping rotation and the other known as Optimal Drift, being heavily focused on making the most of your perfect balance by using actions in a certain order depending on the duration of your buffs. Oh yeah, there was also this really memey Dragon Kick filler rotation that came about, because Dragon Kick actually did more than True Strike and Snap Punch, out of form. Although the correct quote-unquote rotation was still better, of course. And then Dawntrail came along. The effects provided by Dragon Kick, Twin Snakes, and Demolish are replaced with producing 1, 2, and 3 orbs that are spent one at a time by the alternative attack in each form. Anatman is obviously removed since it has nothing left to do, and these buff timer simplifications also means the rotation mainly functions on a select few key things to keep in mind while following the built-in sequence rather than worrying about optimal drift and specific loops. The expansion also launched with a funny oversight that meant Dragon Kick actually didn't need Oppo form to grant its bonuses, leading to the rather cursed Boot Kick 1-1-2-3 moment in Monk history, which greatly overshadowed the whole 1-2-3 orbs thing. Shortly after, this oversight was fixed, and the orb count was changed to 1-1-2, which incidentally causes the orbs to enforce the exact organically occurring loop from when Twin Snakes and Demolish maintained something, now it's just orbs. What does that mean? Essentially, from A Realm Reborn to around Shadowbringers, Monk steadily and gradually moved towards a very specific design style. GCDs are centered on forms, Chakra adds synergy with crits, and the job focuses strongly on positionals and keeping a couple plates spinning in Twin Snakes and Demolish, and adding extra burst to this sustained damage through OGCDs. And of course, if the job is stopped, it has to wind up Greased Lightning again. And then, once this design was established, for some players, the things the job stood for were gradually taken apart to make it easier, and for others, inconvenient and overly complex details were taken out so that they could focus on the core of it. Consider that by Shadowbringers' launch, Monk already had sort of reached its basic idea of alternating Bootshine and Dragon Kick, alternating True Strike and Twin Snakes, Demolish once, Snap Punch twice, which may sound familiar. Late Shadowbringers took away the Greased Lightning maintenance. Endwalker launch took away the combination of a consistent clockwork rotation supplementing with OGCDs to make space for Masterful Blitzes instead, and removed most of the positionals, but it was still alternating Oppos, alternating Raptors, and 1 and a 2 for Quirl. And then Dawntrail came and took away the plate spinning part of it all. Instead of these 2-2-3 sequences emerging organically through how the job's effects work, the game just tells you outright what to press. What is peculiar about a change like this is that when the reason your rotation works a specific way is associated with buff timers, or generally more fluid mechanics, they are able to change with other mechanics. In Endwalker, sometimes you'd have to Twin Snakes twice in a row because of downtime. Sometimes you skipped Demolish entirely because the enemy wasn't going to live long enough to justify it anyway. In some rare scenarios, your GCD might be so fast that you could actually manage to reach Raptor form 3 times within the 15-second buff window of Twin Snakes, and 4 times for Demolish, meaning you could True Strike and Snap Punch more. Extended fights with 2 targets like the currently relevant Battle of the Bros, M10, would significantly impact an Endwalker Monk's rotation, as they would suddenly flip to Demolish twice, Snap Punch once. What makes the Dawntrail orb changes even weirder is that initially the job shipped with 2 orbs for Raptor form and 3 orbs for Quirrell form, which would have been a distinctly different rotation from the pre-Dawntrail one. It just so happened to be accompanied by a bugged Dragon Kick that allowed monks to start every sequence with Dragon Kick, a step 2, a step 3, and then Boot Shine, and then just a Dragon Kick again. And when this oversight was removed, the orb count also just got changed to match the numbers that made the filler rotation exactly the same as pre-Dawntrail, before we even got to properly try the new way. Monk is not the only job that went into Dawntrail with a drastic change or revert super early though. But having the orb count be 1, 2, 3 at least made sense in a way, while the best explanation as to why it is 1, 1, 2 is that it happens to match with how the job used to work. Sure, Twin Snakes giving 15 seconds of damage buff and Demolish giving 18 seconds of dot are ultimately numbers that they plucked out of the air too. Yet somehow, when it becomes by design through the orb system, it feels like it sort of requires a bit more of an explanation than that. An additional oddity with these changes is also that in the level range of 50 to 59, where you have perfect balance but no masterful blitz, unless you're doing AoE stuff, using perfect balance is actually a loss. Essentially because at level 50 to 59, the difference in the 1, 2, 3s is so minuscule that the fact finishing perfect balance forces you to use a no-form Dragon Kick, loses you any possible gain perfect balance could have offered. Oddly, this wasn't the case with the oversight on Dragon Kick where it didn't need Oppo Oppo form. This kind of situation where a new button, learned at level 50 no less, is almost effectively useless, might also make the Dawntrail changes feel a bit rushed or unfinished in some strange way. But with all that said, is this ultimately a good thing? Some part of this is of course subjective. Some players like the changes and prefer it this way, and that's absolutely fair. Others less so. But there are some things that can be highlighted as somewhat general positives for the job. The first one is that the current iteration of Monk is a lot more playable at any latency, and a learning player can still play the job right while learning without the timers completely breaking everything apart. The job is a lot less punishing, as choosing wrong on the 1, 2, 3 combos effectively just means a potency loss right now and not a loss over the next few or several GCDs. Moving from spinning plates with varying timers to orbs in a gauge also makes the job way more easily approachable and lets monks focus more heavily on a faster rotation with simpler decisions to make, rather than having a faster rotation and just as complex decisions as other slower jobs. But how is that wrong or a problem? Similar to other job reworks over the years, these changes massively reduce the possibility of hitting major failure conditions and simultaneously significantly reduces the repercussions of hitting said failure conditions if you do hit them. For the players already acquainted with the old systems, this can be a bit like replacing building a card house with just balancing 2 cards against each other. For some players, this ruins the excitement the job offered in the first place, the balancing on a knife's edge to get things just right. For other players, the fact they can relax a bit more and still do fine is welcome relief. I know this probably may sound a bit elitist, but indeed for some players, the repercussions of making a mistake is part of what adds to the excitement in getting it right in the first place. If the difference between doing one or the other is like, 1% less damage, then sure, it is better, but I'm not going to really worry that much. But if the difference is 20%, alarm bells should definitely be ringing if we end up doing that by mistake. Another interesting aspect to this is that having greater punishment for making mistakes introduces a greater distance between the floor and the ceiling of damage potential, which itself, even if you're not going to make the mistake, makes getting it right feel more rewarding for many players. Ultimately, the changes to Monk, and other jobs for that matter, leads us to Predictive Texting. Monk is probably one of the quintessential examples players point to when they suggest that all jobs are bound to gradually change this way. Perfect Balance changed from a buff you could fit a certain amount of actions into depending on your speed, then gradually turned into charges and stacks. Greased Lightning was a buff you had to build up and maintain, but now it is just passive. More convenient. No damage buffs to maintain, no dots to manage, there's just stacks you build and spend that strictly dictate your rotation, so you cannot veer off to the side ever. The fact the orbs were adjusted early in Dawntrail to precisely match the filler rotation it replaced also gives a similarly ominous implication for the more doom and gloom inclined individuals. In various ways, other jobs fit into a similar mold of being herded into a specific rotation with no variance, and some are still flexible enough to have extra depth in these aspects. To give an example of how this kind of extreme of simplifying, but it is technically the same, could be Black Mage no longer using MP and instead ice spells generate stickers that enable access to specific amounts of specific fire spells, killing off any remaining MP recovery tick-related shenanigans. The normal rotation would be largely unchanged, but any fancy tricks would be heavily damaged in the name of streamlining. To sort of summarize, Monk used to be a job heavily focused on managing a lot of small things at once, focusing on a more sustained damage approach. Notice it used to have 3 dots to manage. The version of Monk we have now doesn't manage anything and is among the more burst-heavy jobs in the game. Phantom Rush ranking in the top 3 of highest possible single-hit attacks, competing with the likes of Hyoshiranryu and Aflato's Misery. If you got into Monk before Dawntrail, it hardly matters when exactly you got into the job. If one of the things you liked about it was the maintenance of things like buffs and dots, then Dawntrail took something away that you enjoyed. If, on the other hand, maintenance like this was something you put up with to enjoy a job you liked despite that, then Dawntrail almost certainly made Monk more enjoyable for you. The same thing could be said about each of the prior expansion's gradual adjustments of Monk. Whether you liked having a lot more positionals, or having Greased Lightning, or maintaining a ton of dots and effects. But one thing is for certain, despite Monk still having roughly the same 1-2-3 filler rotation as it always had since almost the very beginning, the job is a whole universe apart from what it originally was, which means that it is pretty much impossible that it has not at least left some Monk players disappointed as a result. This one goes out to you, Ali, if you're watching. But what do you think? Do you feel like an iteration from the past was the superior Monk, or do you actually prefer the version we have now? Personally, I at least find myself more likely to choose to play Monk here and there than I did in, say, Endwalker. But I was never really a Monk main myself, so that is perhaps not that valuable to know. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Twitch or Ko-Fi. Links in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, originally, in addition to applying a blunt damage increasing debuff to enemies, Dragon Kick also applied a debuff that reduced the target's intelligence, reducing their magic damage done.